That's the first planning impulse then and now, to demolish the homes of the poor as evil places that cause crime and disease. So the Boston City Council appropriated $1.25 million, this is in the 1860s, to demolish the hill, just get rid of the whole thing so that you could have something else. And when that occurred, the reporters noted that the people who lived there, the inhabitants, clung to their homes until the roofs were taken off and their rooms laid bare to the sky. So no matter how wretched other people thought these hovels might have been, it was home to these people, and they were thrown out of their homes. And of course, there was no thought as to where they might go. Today, I'd like to let us confront our own selves in a way, and to see the large obstacle that we have in front of us to accomplish something that might be called equitable development or design for equity. And that is the class and racial ethnic attitudes that we have, which are deeply embedded in Boston's history. I'm a historian, so I kind of look at the long view, and the planning that has taken place in Boston. I think it's this deep. The more I look at it, it's the as I say, the embedded aspect of this that makes it difficult for us to step forward. And so my hope is that by looking at that, understanding, and as I say, owning up to it, we can move forward. So with that, I'd like to take you way back to 1850 in Boston, to a neighborhood. There were two areas of poverty, shall we say concentrated poverty, in Boston in the mid-19th century, where the poor and working class people who were predominantly Irish at that time. This is part of the famine migration, and they hold up in these places. The North End is the other circle, and then this area that was known as Fort Hill. And there you see it had a nice park on top of it, Washington Square. At one time it had been a fashionable place. But if we can look above the word Washington and notice the blocks and how filled in they are. And that's because although the front of Washington Square looked somewhat like you might see in Charlestown and other parts around Boston, a little square with a nice park, in the back, behind those buildings, were all sorts of buildings that had been put in. People were squeezed into cellars, into attics, garrets, and so on. And it's here that we see the first thing that we need to confront, which is the hostility that people had, and I would venture still have, towards the poor who inhabited the slums of Boston. This is Fort Hill. This is a view of Half Moon Place, and as you can see the steps, that was called, ironically, Jacob's Ladder to Humphrey Place, and this is what it looked like in the 1860s. What do you do when you see an area like this, as planners, as civic leaders, as citizens? Why, you demolish it, of course. You just get rid of it. It's unsightly. And so this is quite amazing. I think more people should know about it. That's the first planning impulse then and now. Hello, Hope 6, to demolish the homes of the poor as evil places that cause crime and disease. So the Boston City Council appropriated $1.25 million, this is in the 1860s, to demolish the hill, just get rid of the whole thing so that you could have something else. And when that occurred, the reporters noted that the people who lived there, the inhabitants, clung to their homes until the roofs were taken off and their rooms laid bare to the sky. So no matter how wretched other people thought these hovels might have been, it was home to these people, and they were thrown out of their homes. And of course, there was no thought as to where they might go. Now, what happened there? Why did they do this? Well, it was right in the line of commercial development as Boston was expanding its little business district, and there you see how that area has developed over the years. So the poor had to make way for downtown progress, big shiny new things. All right, well, that's the negative attitude, get rid of something. What's the positive attitude? The positive attitude, when you have some new land, what would we do? I have an idea. There's a great marshy area along the Charles River. Let's fill that in. Now, we need housing in Boston. It's growing, the population is growing in the late 19th century a lot. And so we need to make homes for people. What kind of homes? Let's make luxury homes. It's a luxury district. That's the second impulse. Whenever you're planning, after you get rid of stuff, then you build something for the upper echelon of society. Tempted to say the 1%. And so we see this, and how do you make sure that happens? You make sure there are anchor institutions, the high status churches, museums, and so on, and then the wealthy come and they build their mansions there, and before you know it, you have a whole district of luxury housing. It never dawned on them to have anything but the highest levels of society live here. That's what building a beautiful, great city was in their minds. So we have to confront that. I would suggest that both these attitudes, the one of knocking down the homes of the poor and dispersing them, and two, having high-end development, are still have been and are still part of our consciousness. So we'll jump ahead to 1950. The city, that's a moment after World War II. We're going to rebuild Boston. What shall we do? How shall we do it? They looked around and they said, there's not just one little Fort Hill. There's like lots of areas of Boston that need to be redeveloped, is the nice word for it. That means clear it out, get the bulldozers. So I want you to look at this map and really ponder it. Everything in red was slated for demolition. Complete, utter clearance. That's almost all of Charlestown, East Boston, the North End, South Boston, and the South End, about half of Roxbury, and major slices of Jamaica Plain, Dorchester, and Hyde Park. That was the plan, all right? And just rebuild it. And you can imagine how they were thinking of rebuilding it. So this was part of a widespread coalition bought into this idea of the planning of the new Boston, as they like to call it. So here's the mayor at the helm of a bulldozer with the very powerful Congressman John McCormick from South Boston looking on at the start of the demolition of an area known as New York Streets. This area is little known to most of us, but it should be marked. Somewhere there should be a plaque. This is where Mel King, the great leader of Boston, where his family was, and it was his family's home that was destroyed along with other folks. So this was, as in Boston, Boston had a relatively small black population, which meant that in some areas you had integrated places, and the New York streets was one of them. Whoops, going a little fast. And so if you want to know, this was the place where they changed it into industrial. There's the Boston Herald Traveler. The Boston Herald was placed there. We'll come back to this area later. But that was just the opening round. That was in 1955. And then the much larger project, and there are people here who know this history better than I do, but we should all take a look. The West End. What was the West End? The West End was a working class area. It had the working poor, it had middle class people, it had a lot of working people. It was unglamorous, but a lot of people loved it. They called it their home. It had been a bastion for immigrants and people of all different walks. In the 20th century, it was a heterogeneous neighborhood. There were people from the Middle East, and there were some African Americans, predominantly Italian, but it was this mixed neighborhood. But to the planners, it was an obsolete neighborhood. It was densely built. It was dark. There were no open spaces. It cost more in city services than it contributed to the city itself. The very place, and this is a quote from the text there, impaired the physical and mental health of its inhabitants. So, time for a new plan. 6-story, 9-story, 13-story elevator buildings, 68% fewer buildings, 40% fewer families, and lots of off-street parking. Yay! So they did this. There is the West End. Look in the foreground and watch carefully. Boom. Whoops, I went too fast. There we go. It's been surgically excised from Boston. A tremendous blow. Now, what in the end did they put in its place? They put in the Charles River Park, and here we see an advertisement for it. Now remember, there were lower class, working class people there before. This is going to be the wonderful experience of spacious in-town living with air conditioning, swimming pool, wine storage cellar, babysitting, valets, maids. You could get that. You get the sense that this might be for a different element of the urban population. And I just have to throw this in. It's in the list there, something that you don't hear about much anymore, casserole service. Do you come home too late to cook? All right, so here's what it looks like. Victor Gruen designed it. If you lived here, you'd be home by now. Most Bostonians know of this. All right, this wasn't the only major source of destruction. Of course, the highway plans. Here, from that same 1950 general plan for Boston, is the set of highways that were planned. Now, several of them were built, of course, but not the inner belt, which is that red line that runs down the center of your map, and also several of the linkages were not built. But that was the plan, and coincidentally, they ran right through some of the same neighborhoods that they had planned to demolish. Hey, nobody will be there. So there we go. That might, for those of you who know Boston, that might be an easier map to sew. What would this look like, this new Boston? It would look like this. This is maybe along Columbus Avenue, and in that stretch through the corridor there, they envisioned all these super highways, a few tree plantings, and no people, because it was to be an expressway to move people from the suburbs into the city and back again. And this is what happened. Often, even though they didn't build the road, it had almost as much destruction created almost as much destruction. Here it is, the railroad corridor and the Columbus Avenue in the 1970s. And of course, this area ran right through the working class and African American neighborhoods. All right, new era. local participation. As we get in the 1960s, Mayor John Collins is elected, and he names the man with the big stick on the left. I always have a sort of laugh line when I show this. I say, when I show it to classes, I say, young people, I just want to warn you, when you go out into the world, be careful when you see a lot of white guys in suits with a big stick, because they're coming for your neighborhood. Which isn't totally fair to Ed Logue, who took a big step towards what we might call participation. But his idea of participation was get the local people to agree and then push forward. And now I want to complicate the story a little bit, because, as I say, these attitudes are embedded in us. When the Boston Redevelopment Authority went to draw up its redevelopment plans, there was a group in Roxbury, which was by then, that section of it was a predominantly African-American neighborhood, of middle-class African-American leaders who were trying to deal with the influx of lower-class African-Americans. And one of the things they were quite concerned about was blight, and the Washington Park area was the center of it. So they actually asked the BRA to come in and help produce a redevelopment plan. And so here are Otto and Muriel Snowden, the founders and the runners of Freedom House in Roxbury. There's the mayor. There's the BRA chief, Ed Logue. The Snowdens worked hand in hand with the BRA, and the BRA came up with a plan to demolish half the homes in a 186-acre district. But Logue and the others deemed that too politically hot to go out and announce. We're about after the West End. Bostonians were not in a mood to have their neighborhoods destroyed. So he wasn't going to announce that. So he had another trick, and this is the guile of Ed Logue. He redrew the boundaries of the urban renewal district and from 186 acres to 500 acres. So it was a much larger area. He still said we'd still demolish all the same number of homes, but the percentage dropped down. So now it was only about 30%, so more palatable. And they went forward with this. Now, I don't mean to knock the Snowdens. They did wonderful work in Roxbury. Freedom House was educational and social service center. They really tried to help those people. What I'm trying to say is that these attitudes about the poor, about unloved groups, shall we say, run very deep and are something we have to struggle with. In the end, they displaced, the BRA displaced 1,275 families and individuals who were eligible for public housing, and many other people in the Washington Square area. Now, the plan did call for, and you can see all the red in this in the plan is for new housing. So they weren't barbarians like the 1950s planners, and here are some of the projects. But as built, most of this new housing that you see there was for moderate income people. There was not enough of it for all the people who had been in Roxbury, and it was too costly for the low income working class people. In their cost level, there was only one project, which was 200 units of low-income housing for elderly people. All right, the rest I can go by a little bit faster. We come to the 1960s and 1970s, and I call this chapter Resistance. This is where the people of Boston rose in righteous indignation against their planners and said, we've got to stop this. And I won't go through all the triumphs, but I will show this. I think is a very important chapter in the South End. It's called 10th City. It's where the protesters, and Mel King was a part of this movement, took over a site of the BRA, the Boston Redevelopment Authority's office trailers where they were planning this huge high-end project for South End, and said, no way, we are going to have a say in the redevelopment of our own community. And there were, so there's Mel King, who's still doing great work with his technology center in the South End. And there is in the center with the, you wouldn't recognize him, but with the long hair and beard, that's Pat Clancy of what was then called the South End Community Development and is now called the Community Builders, working with the Tenants Development Corporation. Mary Longley is the leader there about 1974, and that represents the kind of coalition of community development savvy and community development resistance. But we go beyond protest to development. And so Boston has many wonderful examples of what we might call equitable development. Of course, one of the most splendid versions of that is Via Victoria, which is Puerto Rican Tenants Association with a driving force for redeveloping large sections, a large section of the South End, and beautifully designed in the 1970s. I can't show you all the wonderful projects. I'll just throw a few. Tent City, that's important because after many years, this was the result of that Tent City encampment and takeover. And this is a mixed income project. I believe it's, somebody can correct me, but I believe it's, I'm going to say one-third, low income, moderate, and market. I might be off on that. It is the case for Langham Court. I remember that more clearly. That also in the South End. One of my favorite projects. Notice how the design of these blend in with the area. In fact, are appealing. They are not of some different design meant to stand out. So I could go on about that. And in the community development era, and I will say that's sort of from the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s before the crash, we have partnerships of all sorts with nonprofits and civic leaders. And notice also the governor and the mayor are on that too. So there's Boston really excelled in coalition, or whatever you want to call it, alliances between all the sectors, government, the neighborhoods, often in the form of nonprofits, and the private sector. And they didn't always tear everything down and rebuild. A lot of those sites where you see new buildings were cleared for the urban renewal days, and so they go forward. And here we have Columbia Road, part of the Boston Housing Partnership 2 set of programs, the Granite Properties. 2,000 units in Roxbury and Dorchester, which the government and private owners had tried and failed to preserve for over 20 years. And here it is, redesigned and rehabilitated by the Codman Square Housing Development Corporation. So we see rehab. And then, of course, one of the tremendous triumphs of neighborhood planning, equitable planning, is the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, in which the representatives of the local area took the power of eminent domain and literally took control of the planning process for their area. And I hope most of you know about that, so I won't spend time on that. But I will give you a sense of the infill housing that happens along Dudley Street and Roxbury. So we have Jim Vrabel here. He's an expert on the people's planning movement, both protest and development. So I won't go on, but I will now go to the last and final chapter, today. And we don't need to go far to think about a big question. What is the direction? Given our history, what is the direction of the new Boston here in the 21st century? All you have to do is step outside this building and look at the South Boston Seaport District. There was, just like the Back Bay, a tremendous opportunity to build a neighborhood. I will let you decide whether the Seaport District is a mixed income area, whether there's a place for low income or moderate income or even middle income people. But I will suggest it's a high end place. And we can go back to the New York streets And that same area, well, they knocked down the Herald building, and they scratched their heads. What could we put here? Oh, let's put in the ink block. Let's put in really expensive condos, impressive, $1,000 plus per square foot we have there. So I will just end with this challenge. I know we've got representatives of the Planning and Development Agency here. I don't know if there's anyone from Massport or other agencies. That first, that we confront our own consciousness. And no one should be self-righteous about this. We all have this. Our impulses to avoid, disperse, remove working class and poor people, people of ethnicities and racial minorities that are different from us. That survives today. And so I would challenge, can we continue the effort that's embodied in Boston's community development efforts and redefine planning? And by the way, when I say that, I want to go, we're almost done here. I want to go a little bit further. This is my little pet proposal, which is, why do government agencies and governments, and I would ask the mayor this himself, and the mayor before him, and so on, why do they always wait for somebody else to do the work? They always say, well, we need the developers to come, and then we'll put in some inclusionary housing, and the developers will do all this work. Why don't they take it up themselves? We heard the wonderful presentation about Seattle. Seattle government has land. The state has land. We have, Massport controls land. The city of Boston controls land. Why don't they just do something with it and create an equitable urban society for the future? Thank you.
This was probably the absolute best development you could ever get for that particular site, and it would have been the least intrusive on a community, and so we all supported it.